Well, Nori wanted us to both share what we believe and why, and what are the ramifications for that belief, and also for believing in the other person's direction. So, should I just go ahead and share that, Nori? Okay. Well, as you can probably tell from Nori's introduction of me, I take a stand that everyone is born with their sexual orientation, that you're either born heterosexual or you're born homosexual, and that it's not changeable, and that it is not something you choose. And the reason that I have come to this understanding, this belief, I didn't start this way. You know, I have a pretty conservative background. I was raised in a Baptist church. My parents were, I started attending church before I was born. My parents were very involved in Gardena Valley Baptist Church, and then when I was in my 20s, I started coming to Evergreen Baptist Church. Always had the teaching, the traditional teaching, that homosexuality was not part of God's plan. And so I think that I first started kind of thinking more about that when they started publishing stories like in the LA Times about, scientific discoveries about how there are certain differences in the brain of a homosexual person versus a heterosexual person, and since that time, there's been so many different scientific studies, I think, that have also shown that there is some kind of physiological, biological basis to this. And I remember asking, my pastor now is Pastor Ken Bong, and I remember asking him one Sunday, this was years ago, when one of these studies had come out, I said, what do you think about this? Why would God create people this way? Because it certainly seemed to, the studies seem to say that people were born homosexual. Why would God create people this way and then say it's sinful? And I remember his answer that made me so mad was, I don't know. He said, I don't know. And I thought, why don't you know? What should I have seminary for? Tell me the answer to this. There should be a simple answer. And, but it made me think, what he was doing was putting it back on me as, you need to wrestle with this. You need to think, I'm not going to just feed you stuff. And so that, I think, was sort of the beginning of my trying to wrestle with this issue. And then what made it more real is a good friend of mine who I had studied for the MFT, the Marriage and Family Therapist licensing exam for, and for years. And we were just friends for years, forever. And he came out, and that was, kind of it wasn't a shock. I mean, we knew he was older and he wasn't married, and I guessed that he might be gay, but he had gone through like 9 years of Desert Streams ministry. That's I think it's related to Exodus International Ministries, where they believe in reparative therapy, and you can pray for God to heal you of your gayness. And so he went through 9 years of that, both being prayed for and also being a leader in that whole ministry. He would travel the world speaking to groups of people about this. After 9 years, I think he was just kind of so beaten down by the fact that he couldn't say that he was healed of it himself, that he came out to our church and he left. And he started attending All Saints Episcopal Church in Pasadena, which is more, it's welcoming and affirming to the LGBT community. So that was one thing, and I kept up my friendship with him. I wanted to talk about this with him, and so I pursued him. And first he didn't want to talk to me, but I was very persistent. And as I heard his story, it was very moving to me. I just thought, people need to hear this. As somebody who and he was also, as long as I've known him, he was a worship leader at church. So he was in ministry, and as long as I've known him, he always sought God. He always wanted to be of service to God. He was just and he was a therapist, wanted to help people, felt called to help people. And I just couldn't understand this. And so we'd had this over several years. We just had these talks periodically. And I decided somebody needed to hear his story. And so I had kind of spearheaded with Bill Watanabe through the CSI group to have Gary share his story, kind of sponsored by CSI, sponsored by Evergreen Baptist LA, my church. And so Gary and I got up and we just had this dialogue in front of like 400 people. So that was kind of the beginning. It kind of opened the conversation, right, to a lot of the Asian churches in the area. And you know, the reception was not all warm. I found out how unpopular a subject this is. It's not a sympathetic group of, LGBT people are not a sympathetic group of people in the minds of Christians. And so it was, and it's been, so this was it 2 years ago or 3 years ago that we had this conversation at Evergreen? And these last 2 or 3 years, I have to say, it's not been easy sticking to this area of calling. And I feel like God is calling me to be a reconciler, to bring this issue to the forefront at churches. And I've often asked God, why this issue? I don't want to do this. It's so uncomfortable so often for me because it's not a popular issue and because I'm often on the opposite side of the issue from really nice people like JP. I don't want to be. I'm very much into harmony, interpersonal harmony, and so I just, however, at our church we talk about the hero's journey, and it's what God calls individuals to do. That even though it could be hard, that if you feel like God is speaking to you, then you've got to go for it. You've got to take the risk and follow God's lead. And so that's what I feel like I've been doing on this issue for the last several years. So all this to say that I think part of my conviction comes from my personal relationship with my friend Gary Hayashi, who I had this very public conversation with. And then also recently, our other associate pastor, who was associate pastor several years ago at Evergreen, he came out. And we've been good friends since when we were in high school. And he had a lifelong ministry calling as well. He was, he started out in worship, very gifted musically, and his story was very parallel to Gary's. That he had always known he was gay, but felt that he could not serve in ministry if he ever came out, and so he had to, at age, he's in his mid-50s, had to leave the church and leave his senior pastor position in order to finally come out and to be honest. And then I think what this comes down to is where is there a place in the Christian community for serious Christians who happen to be gay? And that's the case for my two friends. Is that they are committed Christians who are, and they happen to be both Asian, looking for a place to be embraced and welcomed, and have a Christian community, a faith community to be a part of. And I think that's the thing that keeps me doing this, is because it breaks my heart, that really it's so hard to find a place for them to fully live out their Christian calling, and yet to be fully who they are as gay men. So that's anyway what I believe and why. Should I go into the other stuff too, or should we give?
Maybe we'll just go back and forth.
Fighting the cold, so if I clear my throat a lot, that's why. First of all, Nori, thank you for the invitation. Mary and I would discuss this issue at length. I had no idea that he actually thought I was being sensitive about the issue. But it's good to know that it came across that way, because I certainly think that the church throughout history has done a horrible job of showing love to the gay community, even if, you know, the stance tends to be what I would just say to be the more traditional way. And I think we've really failed in just showing love to that particular community when there are so many offenses that are boldly lived out in the life of the church that we just ignore or even affirm. That's always been very problematic to me. I would take what some would call the traditional position on homosexuality, that it's not compatible with the teachings of Scripture or the Christian life. My basis for that is simply what the Word of God says, and I know there's a lot of debate about that as well. There's a lot of debate about whether it was talking about homosexuality as a personal practice, or whether it's talking about temple prostitutes, or whether it's talking about people who don't have a bent towards homosexuality, who practice it for hobby or for sport, or whether it's talking about someone who truly is engaged in homosexual lifestyle in a committed relationship. After doing my own studies on it, I just, the conclusion that I draw is that it speaks to all of those issues. It does speak to male prostitution. It does speak to those who just engage in for sport, but it also speaks to those who would say that is their inclination, and even say that they were born with it. Looking at the writings in 1 Corinthians, certainly looking at the Levitical laws, looking at the writings in Romans chapter 1, and breaking all those things down. That is the conclusion I came to. I could read them all and quote them all to you. I'm not sure how fruitful that would be today. Having said that, surprisingly enough, I do believe that it's possible for a person to be born gay. Just in gay friends that I know, and just hearing stories like yourself, I mean, it's clear that this person says, I've felt this way from the very beginning. I've only felt this way. I also do believe that it's possible for a person to experiment and move to a place where they move to regular bisexuality or even homosexuality. And for that reason, I do believe that it's possible for someone to be transformed. And I say that as opposed to behavior modification, because I don't think the gospel is about behavior modification. I really do believe that it's about transformation. And transformation doesn't necessarily mean I'm healed of this, I don't do this anymore. But I do believe that transformation means that I'm crucified with Christ, and no longer live. It's Christ who lives within me. I would say in response to that, that as a 42-year-old single male, heterosexual, that in the case of a Christian who has homosexual tendencies, I would say that the road to that must be celibacy, or let me say a commitment to celibacy, because I don't believe that if a homosexual person who's really striving to live in a way that pleases God and tries to live a life of celibacy, if they stumble and find themselves in that situation, I don't believe it's time to kick them out of the church. We would have a very empty church if every person who struggles with sin messed up. We wouldn't have anyone. And unfortunately, again, homosexuality is an issue that the church has decided to zero in on for whatever reason. And it breaks my heart that that's the case when you have heterosexuals who are living just as promiscuously, or who are regularly engaging in sexual intercourse as homosexuals are. Secular statistics would show that the gay community is probably the most promiscuous community. The gay male community is probably the most promiscuous community. That it's possible to have as many as 300 partners, some would say in a year, some would say in a lifetime. And I think that's because that men just tend to tilt more towards promiscuity than women do. And so it's much more readily available if men are seeking men, basically. I do think that it can be a destroyer. When Paul talks about it being degrading, he's not saying it's degrading because of what you do. He's saying it's degrading because of how it can be degrading to the mind, how it can be degrading to the body, that it can bring about deterioration of the body. I was reading something that talked about the former Surgeon General of the state of New York, when he saw not only incidents of sexual transmitted diseases, but also incidents of domestic violence. He said they were off the chart taking place in the gay community, that there is something there, particularly amongst men who are more prone to violence, gay or straight, that you see levels of violence even rising in those particular communities. So why do I believe that way? That's my understanding of Scripture. It's not a personal bent. It's not a personal prejudice. I have gay friends. And that has been a recent thing that God has really stretched me on to continue to believe the traditional view, but saying, hey, this is my word, but guess what? You still got to love them, because I say that also. I can just tell a story. In my gym, there's a woman that I came to befriend. I wrote a screenplay recently. She is a script supervisor. She offered to read my script just for some points and tips. She's a lesbian. We've met on a couple of occasions just to discuss the script, and then I get a text, hey, want to go to the movies? I'm like, oh, Lord, this is a new one. And, you know, as cliche it might be, what would Jesus do? Jesus would go, so, you know. And, you know, she is my friend. Nancy is my friend. It is not my place at this point to say this is what the Bible says, because she's my friend. She's not one of my parishioners. She doesn't go to my church. She's not a Christian. That's like asking me to stand by the tenets of Buddhism. I'm not Buddhist. She hasn't made that connection. What my job is, not just for now, but for always, is to love her and to show her the love of Jesus. You know, I cringe when I hear Christians say we have to love them first. No, we have to love them, period, from start to finish. So that's my stance on it. I guess the question is, what are the cons of believing the opposing view? I just think we go into a slippery slope. That it's homosexuality, and then honestly it's things such as pedophilia. Then it's just a clearly opening up of sexuality and more of an openness and more of a freedom to it as well. And I say that not, you know, being paranoid about it, but you certainly see in the New Testament in which there were a number of a very large gay community at the Church of Corinth, because it was just inundated in the culture. 14 of the first Roman emperors were either gay or bisexual, and had regular relations with boys. Nero married a boy at a lavish ceremony. So I just think it's a slippery slope, and I do think we've seen that in the church, not just with homosexuality, but with sexuality in general. There is just such an openness and such a permissiveness, and I just think homosexuality is a subculture of that. It's not the scourge of the church. We've also seen a great larger openness to divorce, and you've got the right-wingers who say that homosexuality is the biggest threat to Christian marriage. No, Christians are the biggest threat to Christian marriage, because we have just made divorce just so easy. And all the big fight against gay marriage, you know, I wish the church had spent a lot of that resources on, you know, really making the marriages in the church stronger, instead of spending so much time telling other people that you can't get married. So, I don't know if I covered everything. That's probably a good introduction.
Okay. Do you want to keep going with the next points, or do you want to open up for questions? Or
Can I say one thing about again being born? That because I didn't really finish that part. I do think it's possible for a person to be born with that, but I believe that all of us are born with this in nature. I have struggled with depression since childhood, and it wasn't until adulthood I was able to identify what it was, but I have no desire or inclination to continue to live in that, because it has the propensity to destroy my life. Some might say that that's apples and oranges. It is something that they've also found psychologically to be, you know, serotonin imbalances and all these other things, and I clearly have that, but I'm working on it. And also, as a 42-year-old single male who lives celibate, I would hope that that would not change if I weren't a pastor. I would hope that that really is my Christian conviction, not my pastor's conviction. So I would say any Christian needs to be willing to not be conformed to the ways of the world, but to be transformed by the renewing of the mind. So that's what I say.
Any questions at this point, or do you want to keep going?
I'll keep going as in.
Well, I laid out a couple points. The first was why you believe the way you do. The second one is, I think, something about the dangers of the believing the other way.
Yeah, dangers of the
And then the third one was, I don't remember. And the fourth one was, was that it? So it's just
I
three?
think so.
Yeah.
Okay, and the last one was a Q&R, a question and response.
So I could respond a little bit. Well, first of all, JP, I appreciate hearing what you have to say, because I think you do come from a position of love. It sounds like that you are attempting in your church to be Christ, right, first of all, and love, period. And I think that is what churches need to commit to on this issue, that shouldn't, that shutting the doors to the LGBT community is not being Jesus, not being Christ, is not accomplishing what we're called to do as Christians. And I think that kind of describes what I would think the danger is of going too far in the direction of saying, homosexuality is a sin. It's something that you need to be healed of, because if you believe that you were born this way and you've always been this way, and you've struggled with it your whole life, then it's hard to be a part of a worshiping community if you feel that the rest of the congregation feels that you're somehow bad, that you're somehow less. I think that the church has used some of those verses in a way that really stigmatizes and judges homosexuality, and that's what has made it hard for my friends who are gay to find a place to worship, because I kind of get a sense of what it's like, even just being an LGBT activist like I am, because sometimes I feel when I'm going into a church, even my own church, that people are looking at me funny, because they know that I have this kind of a minority view, and so when I told this to my friend Gary, he goes, "Well, welcome to my world." That's what it's like when you're gay and you're a Christian, is that you're always wondering when you go into a faith community, and just try it out to see if you would fit in. You're always wondering what they think of you. Do they think that you have this disorder that needs to be healed? Are they judging you? So that's, I think, one of the dangers is that we're shutting out serious, sincere Christians who happen to have same-sex attraction. Another danger to me is the degree to which the church takes a really negative stand toward homosexuality, that when they take a hate position rather than a love position, then I think that it feeds the whole culture, especially the junior high culture, of bullying kids who are different, boys who are a little effeminate, or kids who are just different. It's scary out there in junior high land. My daughter just started junior high this year, and I kind of fear for her, because anything that stands out, that makes you stand out, is different. She just had to have the same PE clothes as everybody else. There's no, rule that says that you have to have a certain PE clothes, but she said if she doesn't have the PE clothes that match everybody else, then they're gonna, give her a hard time. So, it's fitting in is really important, and then the kids are really mean at that age. So I think that's why oftentimes those suicides happen, right, at the junior high, going into high school age group, is because kids are so vulnerable. And the degree to which the church doesn't help to embrace those kids who are different, or let them know they're okay. I mean, I think that it would be hard for a church if they had a really hard stance that, it's not okay to be gay, but the kid felt that that's the way that's the way they are. It would be hard for them to continue in that setting. Now, there's also another danger that's related, is that just young people in general, I think, are becoming more, probably you guys course are younger than me. You just have a more open attitude. You're more accepting, more tolerant of diversity. And so they keep saying, that with this next generation, that the whole issue of homosexuality will kind of disappear because the younger generation will come and be so accepting that it won't be an issue so much anymore. But in the church, I think it continues to be an issue. And anyway, so I'll share with you what happened with my son. I have a 17-year-old son, and he has stopped going to church with us. And what happened was last year, there was a series on homosexuality. And in our church, we don't take it, our pastor is like JP. He's very welcoming and loving. He stresses the love, stresses the acceptance, the forgiveness aspect, and doesn't go into, you have to be healed of this. So anyway, in the youth group, I guess the youth leaders just asked all the kids in youth group, they had a poll, they took a poll, and how many of you believe that homosexuality is a sin? And I guess all the kids raised their hands, except for my son. And then I guess after that experience, he felt like, everybody thinks it's a sin, and I'm the only one who doesn't. I don't know if I can continue to go to this youth group. And he essentially, I don't think it was just that. He was just getting to that age too where he wanted to rebel. But that was one other thing that happened that made him feel different. So, so we also might lose just young people who feel like the church is holding on to a antiquated notion of homosexuality. That's not a big deal, but I just thought I'd share that because it was a personal thing. And then I think that the churches have that don't ask, don't tell policy in place, right? Is that this is something that you don't talk about, and so if you do have same-sex orientation, just don't say anything. It's better to just lay low, not let anyone know, and that's the only way you can continue to be a part of the worshiping community, right? Is that if you just are not completely honest with people. And I don't know if that's completely the way Jesus would do things either. I think he would want to embrace people in all of who they are. And the worshiping community ideally wants to embrace people in all of who they are. And so that continued idea that it's a stigma to have a same-sex attraction, I think. And I don't have any easy answers for people, pastors especially. You're in a very difficult position because you want to be welcoming, you want to embrace all of God's children, and yet you want to maintain a certain value system too. There are values of purity that apply to heterosexual people as well as to gay people, I think. So there's no simple solution to this, but I just think that it does. Well, let me share with you a book that I made a few copies of this book review of this book that I don't know if you're familiar with this book, JP. Jesus, the Bible, and Homosexuality. It's there's only 10 copies, sorry, but it's a really nice review of this book. I like this book because it's written by a guy who really didn't want to address the issue either, but he was directed to. He was who's the guy at the top of the Presbyterian Church, the moderator. He was the moderator of the presbytery, and he was directed to research the issue of homosexuality, and he had a particular viewpoint, the traditional viewpoint, and after doing the research, he actually changed his mind, and he wrote this book. And this is a book that's referred to a lot by people who want to, take a serious look at Scripture and what the Scriptures have to say.